Well, good day viewers. Today we have an '07 Tundra and it's got a Christmas tree of lights going on. 4 low flashing, VSC off flashing, check engine light, stability control light, traction control light, tire pressure monitor, seat belt, but I don't have the seat belt on. But the one in question is the battery warning light, and I'm sure it's not charging because the battery's gone dead. Customer had to tow it here, so we're going to check the charging system out. Had to put a booster battery on it to start it to bring it in. So there's the battery voltage while running with my booster battery on here. So it's obviously not charging. Should be somewhere between 13.5 and 15. It's 12.15, so it's not charging. So we've got to qualify the wires for the alternator and possibly change the alternator. This does not look like it's convenient. The alternator lives way down there. Wow, Toyota's so proud of that alternator they built the entire truck around it. So it's way down below the, looks like power steering pump. Why couldn't they put it up on top? AC compressor down on this side. Let's check the water pump. Fully seems good. Well, got the battery charger on. I'm going to let the battery charge up a bit, and then we're going to put it up in the air. So we're looking at the wiring diagram for this charging system on this Tundra. There's a 4-wire connector at the alternator, and then the heavy battery cable. Of course, the battery cable comes from a large maxi fuse, inline fuse. So that should be live. We're going to make sure that there's power down there. The S wire usually stands for sense, and that comes from a sensing circuit. Now most of the time they'll charge without that sensing circuit, but it'll turn on the warning light. This is not charging. There's ignition wire, IG, power with the key in the run position, so we're going to confirm that wire. This M wire is probably a monitor to the ECM. Yes, it is. And then on the next diagram is the charge indicator light, which is an LED in the dash. And we know that that's working because it's on. So the voltage regulator supplies the ground on that, on the, is it labeled L for lamp. So S for sense, B for battery, IG for ignition, M for monitor, and L for lamp or light. So we're going to confirm those wires, but I've got it up on the hoist. We'll have to take the inner fender filler out to get access to the connector at the alternator. So if you raise it on the hoist, you can access the connector at the alternator and the big battery cable at the alternator. That should be live all the time. As you can see, it lights my test light. Now I've got the key on, and this one lights up all the time. Let's check this one. That one's on. One of these should be, the indicator light is not on with the alternator unplugged. Well, these two circuits are battery power and key switch power, and one of these is from the indicator light, and it's an LED, so it's likely on the dash, and the other one's a monitor circuit. So I'm pretty sure the wiring is good, so we're going to go ahead and proceed to remove the alternator. So I have the negative battery cable disconnected, and we're going to take this shield off of here, but I see it's got a snowplow package on it, which aggravates things. Wonderful. Let's look at what's involved in getting that off, because the alternator has to come out from down here. So I had to take that piece off, that piece of angle iron off, 4 bolts off the plow bracket, and then the shield off. They've been just undoing the shield at the back and bending it down to gain access to the oil filter when they do oil changes. Normally you have to take that cover right off. But there's the alternator up there. Got to take some pieces off. Got to drop this sway bar. 4 bolts on the sway bar and just let it hang. So remove the 4 bolts that hold the sway bar and drop it down. Loosen off the serpentine belt and route it off of the power steering and the alternator. Wow, that alternator is stiff. I can barely turn it. The belt looks pretty decent. I did pick up a new belt, but we'll assess it. While we're here, we'll check these pulleys, make sure there's no rough bearings. Now, if I understand correctly, we have to remove the power steering pump because there's 2 bolts behind the power steering pump. So with the power steering pressure switch disconnected, you can see that there's 1 bolt behind the power steering pump. So we have to unbolt the power steering pump and move it off to the side. And there's 2 bolts, so you can see 1 up there, access through the hole in the pulley. Not pleasant. So you can see that upper bolt through the power steering pump. I got a long flex-headed ratchet on it, and I'm afraid it's going to break. So I'm going to get in here with a torch and heat up this ear, try and release it. I sprayed some penetrating fluid on the back there. I don't want to break that bolt off. So I heated that aluminum ear up there, sprayed it with penetrating fluid, and it's coming loose, believe it or not. I don't know about the next one though. Wow, that's tight. Well, success. I had to fight with this bolt all the way out. It's open at the top, so the salt lays in there and rusts and corrodes. But I got it out. Now to get the power steering pump off the block. So you use a small heel bar to pry the pump out of the way. Now you can see the 2 bolts on the top ears of the alternator there. Look like probably 14. So there's a small 12mm headed bolt right up in here. Right here that holds this bracket to the front of the alternator. Need to unbolt that. It holds the tranny cooler lines and the wiring harness. Yeah. Probably should have unbolted this one from it too, but maybe we can pull it down enough to get at that bottom bolt on the alternator. So remove the 10mm battery cable and pull the battery cable off the alternator. Well, another snafu. The back lower bolt comes out about a 1/4 inch and then stops. I've sprayed the opening in the alternator with penetrating fluid and worked it back and forth. I don't know if the threads are galled or if it's full of rust. You can see the front bolt is all rusty because it goes through an opening in the alternator bracket. So that lower bolt where it goes through the aluminum bracket on the engine block or the casting of the oil pan or whatever that is, it protrudes about a 1/4 inch. And when it does that, it rusts up. If I could cut the end of that bolt off. Well, I sprayed penetrating fluid on the end of the bolt now, and I'm going to work it back and forth. So I got it. I cut the end of the bolt off, screwed it back in, cut the end of the bolt off where we're sticking in because it was all rusty and galled. I used a snap-on air-powered Sawzall up through this opening here and back there, right there. Anyways, the alternator is unbolted. It's still on the dowels though. So this thing just doesn't want to give up. So there's 1 stud up there and it's seized on that stud. It's off the bottom 2 dowels. Now there is a inverted Torx bit end on that stud, so I'm going to try to remove the stud. So you need an E10 to take that stud out. So at least it's not binding on that stud now. Let's see if it's still stuck on that dowel. Well, there it is out finally. It's just about seized, this alternator. And these two dowels have to be taken out and put back into the engine block. But you see how the bolt is open, so the rust builds up inside the bolt hole. Even this one here on the top, you know, it's open. So that was the stud I had to take out. Also, when you go to pull this out, if you unplug the oil pressure switch right here and pull this harness off of the bracket and push it down, gives you a little bit more room and you can weasel it out of there. Well, that's it for tonight. I'm going to have supper. So try to pry these dowels out of here. They're pretty long. They go in about 3/8 of an inch. So I used a 7/16 coarse thread tap to run threads into the inside of the dowel, and then I'm threading in a 7/16 coarse thread bolt, and then I should be able to hit it from the other side with a punch. So I'm going to use a bolt in here. Look at that. Now I can just thread this off. Well, get a pair of pliers. So I'm using that bolt from the top. Okay. Here's the other dowel that I took off. The threads on the inside aren't going to hurt nothing. We'll clean that up with a wire brush. .7/16 coarse tap. So there's all the bolts, and stud, and dowel pins cleaned up for the alternator. We're ready to reinstall. Got to clean the battery cable connection with a Rolox sanding disc. So there's the Wilson part number for this alternator. This is a 5.7 liter engine. It takes a different alternator than the 4.7 or whatever that. I got the dowel pins installed. There's one here and one way up there, and the battery cable eyelet cleaned. So we're gonna get this alternator back on. Put some never sees on those dowels. So there's the alternator installed. The 4 bolts, or the 3 bolts, are 32 foot-pounds, and the 1 nut is 32 foot-pounds. Yeah, we got to install that little brace bracket up here. I see that I bent it slightly, so I'm going to have to straighten that out. And then the power steering pump. There's a sliding ear that contains the nut for the power steering pump, and you have to tap it back. Now I tried tapping it back, it wouldn't go, so I put a 13/16 3/8 drive short socket and a 8mm bolt in there, and I pressed it back slightly with the bolt. Hopefully I can get the power steering pump on now. Well, that was fun. Those 2 bolts going through the water or power steering pump. If you don't reposition that shim, you'll have a hell of a time getting that pump back on. And you got no way to line up the bolts, so you need to be able to slide it around slightly while you put the bolts in. It's impossible to get a torque wrench on there, but if you're interested, it's 34 foot-pounds. So I opted to reuse the original belt. It looks good. Pulleys are all smooth. So that's the belt routed back around the power steering and alternator and tensioned. So we hook up the battery, clean up the battery cables, hook up the battery, and check the charging system output. So there's the battery cables cleaned and tightened, and I had the battery on charge all overnight, so it's sitting at 12.9. Let's start it up. Pay attention to the charge indicator light. Charge indicator light over here should be on. Yes, it is. Should go out when we start it. That's a beautiful thing. Let's check the charging system output. Looks good. Just have a quick look at the diode ripple. got to do is put the skid plate back on, sway bar back up, front wheel back on, and that brace on the plow frame. Seal up these battery post cables, and we should be good to go. Oh, and clear the codes from all the computers. So we're going to do a scan on this thing. Keys on. VCM is connected to the diagnostic port inside. I loaded the previous vehicle history. I'll get the mileage after. Some of the code should have erased because of disconnecting the battery for, well, it was disconnected overnight. But there may be some fault codes related to battery disconnect, engine control system fault, too low or too high battery voltage. So far 6 controllers. So we scanned 11 controllers, and there are codes in the TPMS for tire pressure sensors. The maintenance monitors haven't run in past because of the battery disconnect, and there were codes in the anti-lock brakes. So I'm going to clear all the codes so this thing leaves with a clean slate, except for the TPMS things. I'm sure it's missing sensors or they're dead. And that's it. We'll call this one fixed. Thanks for watching.